Sorry for that, folks. And we're worked on our tech issues, but to continue, I'm not gonna skip the preamble. This is Manolo Luis del Rosario, Mandiregman Kaliradman. I consider him the Edgar of the 21st century, combining two different methodologies of blade and impact-based FMA. His being KI, Calis Illustrissimo, and Lescas. So it's very interesting what he's doing, and he's doing big things in Davao. And as we were speaking before we had technical issues again, he said that he learned that in the late 80s, early 90s with Guro Elmer Ibanez, and I asked him if he's similar to Nico because he talked about his Tang Soo Do background, and Nico is one of the prominent El Sai guys that did Tang Soo Do as well, and then he was giving a background about about Nico, and then it just cut out. So continue, sir.
Yeah, so
Nico Palma, if you know. So Nico Palma is if people don't.
Nico Palma. Yeah.
Go ahead.
So that's how we started. And basically, when Master Elmer moved to the United States, that's when the Lestas guys started going to the source, right? To the old man himself. And that's how we started training under the old man. I mean, we're actually a bit late in the game. We were one of the last guys that he trained before he finally passed away in 2003.
Yeah, so that would have been you guys essentially were the final batch, and that would have been what, the early 90s, if I'm not mistaken.
That would have been
late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, around not late 80s, probably early 2000s.
That's when you got promoted.
Yeah, when we got promoted, because I started in 92, 93. And then we got our instructor certificate, the Lescas 5, we call that includes Nathan Botocano, Mangfil Buena, Joshua Medroso, and myself. We got promoted. We got our certificate in 1998, and then I believe, if I remember it right, we started training in Bang Ben around 99 or 2000. All the way till right before he died in 2003.
Yeah, because he was still pretty, according, I never met the guy. I probably did see him in Luneta when I was a child, because I remember I went to Luneta 3 times with Carobin, which is nag-alaga sa akin, which is my dad's uncle. He was still strong when he was, in late age. Am I correct? Because up to the 70, up to the 90s, he was breaking sticks still with his force.
He was, I think he was like 81 or 82 when he passed away, but he was still pretty strong till late 70s.
Yeah,
because his strength started deteriorating in his late 70s when I believe he got sick with pneumonia and he never kind of recovered that strength. But till that time, he was pretty solid. He was pretty buff. You can see the pictures and the old videos.
Yeah,
the guy was huge.
It's a very common thing that you notice with the GMs of old, with the maestros of that particular generation, because a lot of them served in World War II. A lot of them not only had combat experience, like they killed Makapili, or battlefield experience. They're really buff. Like you see the forearm is big, and then like most Universidors, they tend to be single side dominant. So one side of the body is just a little bit bigger than the other.
A little bit bigger than the other.
Yeah. So some of them ended up having spine issues later on in life. It kind of makes sense because you're holding a stick or a weapon more with your one side. So that's why one side is a little bit bigger than the other one. But he comes from bodybuilding, and also he went to the Kodokan Institute in Tokyo. Am I correct?
Yes.
So
he was Mang Ben was very much into physical fitness. I mean, I don't know if you saw that video. I think it was in YouTube, and it's an old video. But right before demo, the late Master Elmer was actually warming up, and you could see Mang Ben in the background. He was like in his late 70s, right? And he was doing dips as a warm up. As a matter of fact, when we were training with him, because right before he died, we brought him over to Davao because I wanted my guys to experience training under him directly. So I was here for a whole week. And at 80, I think he was 81 at that time, he would do dips and he would tell us, you do this every day. At 81. I mean, that's at that age, that's a mean feat, dude. I mean, for you to be able to carry your body. And these were dips where he had his legs raised. Right? And
so he was like, he was L perpendicular when he was
yeah.
You can only imagine what kind of strength he had.
You can just imagine the kind of strength that he had. There was this one, because a lot of his empty hand actually is judo based because of his Kodokan background. So he actually demonstrated one where you're supposed to throw the guy. And he lifted one of my students at that age off the ground. So even at that age, he was strong. He didn't have the same endurance. But if you're talking about yung single strike, the power of a single strike, he could still dish it out at that age. So as a matter of fact, there's a funny incident where, so when he comes in, he's an old man, right? He's white hair, he's a little thin. He was already a little thin by then. So he starts feeding. And then, of course, my students were like, okay, this is an old man. Maybe I should, what's this? Cut down on my power? Parang alalayan, kumbaga, in the vernacular, alalayan ko to, di ba?
Yeah.
And that upset him. He said, and this is specifically what he said. He said, ba't ang hina ng palo mo, boy? Natatandaan ka na ba sa akin? In other words, in English, it's like, why are you hitting me so soft? Do you think I'm old? And we were kind of laughing and mumbling like, Mang Ben, matanda ka naman talaga. You're really old. You're like, eat something.
Oh man! So I was going to ask about that because there's obviously these mean feats. I was too young to really see and understand all this because I would have been like 7, 8, 9 years old. I only been to Luneta like 3 times, seeing people practice arnis eskrima. Did he give any strategies on how to last that long? Like what kind of food he was eating? Was he doing yoga or
as far as I know? He was a typical Filipino in the sense that he loved his beer, he loved his cigarettes. You see, did you see that video of him with Tatang?
Where he was feeding him slow. Like, he was feeding him slow.
Yeah, he was feeding slow. He actually, if you notice, he had a cigarette on his mouth, and people were laughing.
I mean, I used the wild card gym here. This is a gift to me by Freddie, but to take this into context, our probably greatest stylistic fighter, I'm not saying the best fighter, because probably the best fighter now that we have is either Pacquiao or Pancho Villa. But our greatest stylistic fighter, to me, in my opinion, is still Elorde, Flash Elorde. Flash Elorde was a chain smoker. Yeah. So just take that into consideration. He won all those championships smoking.
Yeah.
Fighting in 15 rounders.
Yeah.
So it just boggles the mind.
It's actually, it's typical Filipino. But one thing is, if you look at the old pictures of his, the old students that he had, the old masters of lightning, a lot of them they had the same physique as he did. For some reason, he chose people who had the same mindset when it came to strength. I mean, these aren't fitness buffs. I'm sure they love their booze and their smoke, but they were ripped, man. And then they had all these tattoos. I think I remember we had a thread one time about why FMA isn't as popular, and it's probably because of the misconceptions that the general perception that people had of FMA. And you look at Mang Ben's first students; they had tattoos all over their bodies, dude. And if you know Filipino culture at that time, tattoos were associated with prisons, right? If you had a tattoo, people looked at you like you're some kind of criminal. Just wasn't accepted at that time. But you could see, these are tough dudes.
Yeah, well, that is the thing. It was now it's different, but for a certain generation of Filipinos, so just to give historical context, the ones that grew up in World War II, they consider people wearing tattoos as part of the hoodlum or criminal element. And there is some
Yeah,
certain back then there is some certain truth to that.
of
Um,
truth to that. Yeah,
but it's also a misnomer to say that Filipino martial arts practitioners are hoodlum people
yeah,
or because
yeah,
if you look at the maestros during that era, they kind of hearken to the gentlemen of the dueling era of the
yeah,
Streza because they're always dressed to the Sunday best. They always dressed to the nines, and
yeah.
they're wearing brute cologne and they're wearing floor shoes
Floor
with
time shoes.
with maybe like a Stetson fedora hat, you know.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
that is a certain generation of escrimadores. They were like Mac Daddy vibe, you know what I mean?
It's actually like it's what's this? It's like a dichotomy of sorts.
Right.
They dress good. They dress gentlemanly. And there's that one side of them, and then there's that other side where,
Yeah, it's Jekyll and
uh,
Hyde for sure. Because a lot of
yeah,
them,
Jekyll and Hyde.
a lot of
Exactly. This is,
a lot of him have actually killed people like that generation
yeah,
because they served in World War II. A lot of them have. So
yeah.
yeah. So again, we're sorry for the technical difficulty earlier. It took me an hour to work it out. Now it's perfectly clear. So let us continue with Manolo's background. Sir, you grew up in a very tumultuous time in the Philippines because I was born a year before EDSA, and so you went to college in the late '80s. Am I correct?
I went to college in the late '80s,
And
so
you finished what year?
it took me a while, dude. I was supposed to finish like 93, 92, 93. My first course was engineering, so that's a 5-year course. So I was supposed to finish 93, but I finished in 95. It took me 6 years, six and a half.
You really love
Oh,
college.
I didn't want to leave. That's for sure.
I'm the opposite of you. I finished in 3 years. Oh, man, I feel
Yeah,
bad. Um,
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, yeah.
concerning that, during that time was a really transitionary period between obviously there was EDSA in '86, then Corey left around '92, and it was a transition period into Ramos.
Yeah.
How was that essentially for you? Because you were going and you started training less gas in I would what 91, 93 around that time period.
Around that time period. Yeah.
So there's a lot of craziness going on during that time, not
Yeah.
just in Manila, but you're originally from Davao.
From Davao.
You're originally
Yeah.
from Davao. So let's
Yeah.
go over that. Let's go over that. I can only speak about my not distant relative, but my clans. We do have some family down there in General Santos. Um, so I can only speak of kind of their experience because they moved because of the land grants that happened after the Hook insurgency in the 50s.
Mm.
So I want you to talk about that, about
So
all this craziness, and because most people don't know, and I don't need you to educate them on why. Because people ask like, is the Philippines like Israel and Palestine over there? Well, Manolo will explain. Go ahead, sir.
well, when we talk about Mindanao, they're actually it's also like a Jekyll and Hyde right now. I mean, if from a Western point of view, they probably see Mindanao as a very dangerous place. But nowadays, it's like any other place. There are just some places that you just don't go to, right? As a non-local, And then there are some places where if you stick to those places, you're pretty safe. But speaking of Davao City itself, in the 80s, it was like a wild, wild west. I don't want to sound like guys who talk about, oh, I had a rough upbringing and stuff like that. I'm just stating facts, right? It was like a wild, wild west kind of place, and I think it wasn't just Mindanao; it was entire Davao because you had several things going on, right? You had a Muslim insurgency, which started with one group and then split into two. From MNLF, it became NMLF and MILF, and then you also had the communist insurgency going on. And because of the weakness of government, you had a lot of what's this? You have a lot of bandits, like people who kidnap people for ransom, people who hold uppers and things like that. So that's the kind of environment. And I mentioned this yesterday. There was a transition time where, because before Davao was like the training ground for assassins for the New People's Army, the Sparrow Unit.
The NPA, yeah.
Yeah, so, the NPA.
So to give a little historical background, I really feel guilty saying this because it's like it will forever be attached to my clan. I have to explain to them what Sparrow Unit is because they don't know. Most Americans know the Sparrow Unit as basically an assassination squad that got rid of Colonel Nick Rowe, a Vietnam vet and former POW, who's also responsible for creating the Siri course in the United States for survival evasion that they teach special operation units guys. The Sparrow Unit didn't start in the 70s or 80s. That particular concept started in Central Luzon during the time of like Luis Taruk and a guy that I'm related to, Colonel Agaton Bolao. They had to figure out a way to create basically like a 100% foolproof plan to kill someone. Yeah. And they thought about doing that by creating like these units that had incredible quick draw numbers. I'm talking about special mission unit type guys today, but they were thinking about that back then. So they would create an L-shaped ambush, and each of those guys could put like a 2x2x2 drill, maybe in like a few hundredths of a second, maybe. So like they would do like
a story of one incident that I really witnessed as a kid. I was
you saw it.
I was like 11 years old, or was it 10 years old? This was sometime in 82 or 83. I think I was in the 5th grade at that time, where there was this certain mayor who was staying in a hotel in one of the main streets of Davao City. And the moment he stepped out, because at that time I was into fish. Even until now, I'm doing aquarium. So I would visit the pet stores, right? So I was walking down that street looking at the pet shops. And then the moment I stepped out, there was a huge bang. And then people were screaming and running. And I see this guy with his face covered like this. He was running down the street. So I told my cousin who was with me at that time, who was younger, I told him, let's go back into the pet store. Stay here till it comes down. Later on, we find out that the certain mayor of a town was assassinated by these Sparrow groups, right, just a few meters from where we were. And this is the main street, man. Main street in San Pedro Avenue. So things like that just happen. As a matter of fact, we have this term called salvage. I don't know how salvage became associated with that, but that the meaning of that is actually a summary execution, either by the military or the NPA, where they execute somebody and then they dump their bodies in a specific location. That's why we have, until now, there's a place here called Barpa or Barrio Patay, because during the 80s,
so translation, Barrio Patay means Barrio Death. Yeah,
Barrio Death, because you'd have bodies
or
you
Barrio
know,
kill or Barrio kill. Yeah,
Barrio kill. Yeah,
yeah.
where you'd have body show up and things like that. So at that time, I mean, that was like that's just how it is. We didn't think much of it. That was life for us back then. And then after the EDSA revolution, when Cory took over, Davao came to the point where, as a city, excuse me, we the city decided, okay, enough of this, enough of communist rebels and things like that. So there were ex rebels who came back into the fold of the government, and then they became a vigilante group utilized by the government to hunt down the rebels that were still in the city. So, and this is how the Alsa Masa movement started. And if you're familiar with the lore regarding Davao, you know, the Davao Death Squad, it goes all the way back, I think, to that particular vigilante movement, the Alsa Masa movement.
I mean, not that
So
not that
you know,
not that not,
it's
not not that we should glorify that, but I'm just saying, like, as the
yeah,
efficiency's sake. I mean, you talk about L-shaped ambush. They would study, like, targets for months. They would know the weak
yeah,
points of a vehicle, so
yeah.
where that particular caliber of bullet would go through, and they practice that. And typically there's five of them. Like, there's like either four or five. Typically those are the numbers. It's like one unit that would shoot up on the side and the other one that would shoot up ahead. They made sure. So
Mm.
if you were in their list, like, yeah, I mean, good luck. I mean, you had a former
Good
Army
luck.
Special Forces guy from here, and did him no good. He's a Green Beret, and
Yeah, yeah. So
like
I
that.
I'm not saying that the DDS movement later on was good. I'm not even sure if they actually exist or if it's just part of a persona built by Duterte uh,
I believe it though.
to
I believe it.
create that rough, I'm tough kind of image, right?
Right.
But back in the day, vigilantism, and this is something that I'm not going to deny. It was real, man. It was real. It was something. You know, tough times demand. Sometimes they're just you just don't have that many choices. Wherein you just have to step out of certain lines to achieve something that you feel you need to achieve. And though those were that's just an example of times like that in the 80s. So, like I was relating yesterday, it wasn't uncommon for you to see tad groups, these religious, folk religious cults who utilize blades, right? To be walking down some of the streets here in Davao, hunting, hunting communist rebels. It wasn't it wasn't something out of the ordinary. And then the tabloids, the local tabloids would actually, publish pictures of the Tad group's exploits, where they would publish pictures of people who got beheaded and stuff like that. And
And sometimes they
that's
would print that in the local paper in Manila. I mean, in
they
the
would
national
print that
paper.
in the local
Yeah,
paper.
that's how really different the culture is. Because, like, you'll never experience New York Times printing like some dude getting beheaded and that kind of stuff. That would never happen here.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so I want you to go over most of the misconception. We're not going to get political in FMA discussion,
yeah.
but just to point out that, imagine the city was like that back then, and it went from that to basically one of the top five safest cities in the planet. So it actually was in a similar list as Irvine, California. So you can explain how it went from basically a city of gods, Ciudad de Dios type of craziness, like it was like, like an actual war zone essentially, to like basically like suburbia. Like, how did that happen?
I can't say that this is actually, but this is just a theory of mine. Um, Talking about the vigilantism, I think that played a huge role in that transition. But eventually, these vigilantes, from crossing the line, if this was the line, right, they were this far, over the years, they went into the line. But the mythos or the perception remained regarding this kind of hardline stance against outlaws. See? So eventually they just got driven out of the city over the years. And a lot of the development that we see right now happened actually during the Ramos era. That's when I really saw a huge difference in investing, in investors coming into Davao. That's when you see buildings cropping up and stuff like that. Because Duterte as a mayor, his main focus was really peace and order. The idea being that if you have peace and order, investors will start coming in and they'll think this is a good place to invest in. And well, that formula actually worked.
It worked
in our
yeah.
case.
Yeah. So that's the main thing is like the rest of the Philippines saw what he did being basically Imperator Rex in Davao because he was a multi-year decade, mayor and see, maybe that would work for the greater Philippines. And so we haven't had a Visayan in president in a while. And so it was great that not saying great that a lot of people are getting killed with the drug war, but hopefully the same thing that came out wrong. I hopefully the same thing would happen with the Philippines now, because the other thing that Duterte had coming from him, he's also part Moro. So I mean, a lot of people here in the West don't know that. So he's like a confluence of both worlds. He's
of both worlds.
Yeah. So he's a hybrid.
So a lot of people would probably criticize him for his stances against certain people from the Moro faction, certain people from the communist faction, but that was part of the concessions that he had to make,
right?
To make Davao what it is today, basically. So that's why he was friends with Nur Miswari, if you remember.
Yeah, and then so
and
in context,
with the local NPA commander here. I mean, that's
so
unheard of.
we have to put some context because we have some Western viewers that don't know who those are. Nur is essentially a warlord, and he used to be a professor, I believe, in UP, right? During the time of Marcos, and so he was kind of all over the place, right-leaning, left-leaning kind of guy. And finally, he decided to maybe we can be our own nation thing, and I'll be the leader of that. So he was actually a professor. He was a college professor. He was a public intellectual, and then became like a warlord. And the whole local NPA connection, National People's Army, it's basically a Maoist communist faction. That Duterte was actually the number one protege of Jose Maria Sison, which is the leader of the leader of the NPA. I mean, I don't want to get shot here. I'm just kind of interpreting what I know.
Julius, I think that kind of mindset where you do have to make concessions,
right? That's reality. That's reality.
That's reality, and that's not specific, or it's not what's this? It's not only Davao that does that.
Right.
I think given all of the different frictions, different socio-economic and intertribal or inter-identity frictions that you have because Mindanao is a very multicultural island.
It always has been, though. It always has been, even before that.
It always has been. And if you want to make, if you want to forge some kind of lasting peace, you have to make concessions on certain things. So, and that's not just now, that kind of thinking here in Mindanao goes back all the way to the past.
Yeah, hundreds of years, centuries.
If you remember Sultan Kudarat.
Yes.
Right? He managed to unify the entire island, almost entire. And we're not just talking about the Moros. We're talking about getting the support of the Lumads as well.
Right.
See?
So explain
And
the differences between the Lumad and the Moro.
because in Mindanao you have three people. Yes, you have the what is characterized as the Christians, the Lumads. When you talk about the Lumads, we're talking about the tribes, the indigent tribes who were not Islamized. They're not Moros. And then you have the Moro tribes, right? So that's the tribe people of Mindanao. Now, there's actually a town in this is in Bukidnon. It's called Tikalaan, right? It's right smack in between. It's right at the foothills of the Kitangwad range, but it's near the Lanao side. It's in the Lanao side. So if this is Mindanao, it's in the western side of that landmass. And their legend is that that town is a town of peace because in the middle of the town they say Sharif Kabungsuan. Well, this is just legend. I don't know if there's historical fact to this, but this town is actually a Lumad town. It's inhabited by by a Manobo tribe. But in the middle of the town, they say this is town of peace because the early tribal leaders of the different Lumad tribes and the Moro tribes, led by Sharif Kabungsuan, made a peace pact wherein they buried religious artifacts of their own belief, and there was a Quran right there in the middle of the town as a commitment to working together in peace with the other tribes. So that's the kind of delicate balance that we have here, actually. And so far, it's really been several decades of trying to fortify that balance so that it veers towards the peaceful side rather than the conflict side.
Since I was actually friends with Ali Dimaporo's brother here,
Yeah.
he was a co-worker of mine, Frank. I want you to go over not only Davao but the other cities in, so
Yeah.
General Santos and the Lanao area. So I want you to go over what you know in these places.
Well, from what I know is that
Zamboanga.
it's saying that Mindanao would have been totally Moro is actually a misnomer. You have a lot of non-Moro tribes here, actually. Like for example, if you go to Jensan, it's a mix, right? You have the Tiboli. The Tiboli, they're not Muslim. You have the Bilaan on the eastern side. They're not Muslim, and then all across the center, you have all of these different Manobo tribes, the Bagobos, the Talaandig, the Matigsalog. These are all the way up to Butuan.
Yeah. So
So
in context to America, they're Native Americans. I mean, that's
yeah,
as far
yeah.
as I could,
So
indigenous
it's
people.
really half. But in addition to that, you have these guys from other places of the Philippines, like who settled in Mindanao, like the Ilonggos. We have Ilonggos, we have Ilocanos, we have the Warais. Uh, I don't think except for Davao, I don't think there's a significant Tagalog community that I know of. Most of these are really from the Visayas, particularly from Negros and Iloilo, and from the Ilocos regions that came over here.
And
And then
so
you have some guys from Samar as
to
well.
provide context for that, for the viewers here in the United States, probably also because those regions also have very prominent farming communities as
Yeah.
well, and so that's why they moved there. Some of them moved prior to the insurgency, but a lot moved after the mid 50s, early 50s, because they got land grants from the government.
Events. Yeah.
And basically they signed a title. So, and a lot of them became very prominent families later because like they worked super hard, they worked 12-hour days, and then they became landowners as well. They became
Yeah.
kind of hacienderos as well. So
Yeah.
they did really well for themselves, and maybe you can talk why that caused the violent uprising later on.
Yeah. If you talk to the guys who live in those border towns between the Muslim areas and the Christianized areas, what they would say is that because Mindanao was a purely undeveloped island before, right?
Right.
Starting in the 19.
Land
It was
before
like
time. It was like land
yeah, it was
before
like
time.
they called it the land. The Davao has this peg, the land of promise. So these land grants were given, and so the settlers came in, and when they went to these areas, specifically the areas near Cotabato, where the Muslims are, these lands were actually not tilled. They were just idle land, right? So at that time, the Muslims were like, oh, I don't have a problem with that because we're not using that land anyway,
Right.
right? But over time, the
And you have
settlers
crocodiles the size of school buses.
the settlers started generating, they started creating an economy and generating wealth. And typical of humanity, dude, when somebody goes up, diba, there's some kind of resentment that builds, and especially when they start expanding and
That's everyone. That's
going into
everyone.
the areas of the Muslims, then that sorts some form of friction between people groups,
Right.
and then that creates some kind of disillusionment or just disenfranchisement, where to the point where they feel that people start feeling that they need to go on an uprising, and unfortunately, that's what happened. I think.
And so, in the greater context of this, you grew up in this kind of strife. Um, it just seemed pretty logical to pick up martial arts. And
Yeah.
have you always known when you were a child that we have our own martial arts? Because I know it's for a particular generation of
Actually,
Philippines. No,
no.
you
No,
go over
I
that.
was
Go over that. Go over
oblivious
that.
to FMA, dude. I was oblivious to FMA. As far as I know, it was just karate, judo, kung fu. I got into martial arts when I was a kid. We had this every Thursday night at 10 p.m. There's a certain channel that had, I'm sure the my generation knows this. They had the Black Belt theater where they would show movies of Jackie Chan, and all of the Bruce Lee clones that you can think of. They would all be there in that black, and I would watch it every Thursday night, and that's actually what got me into martial arts as a kid. It's Black Belt Theater, Snake in the Eagle's Shadow, Drunken Master, the
Snake in the
Jackie
Eagle's
Chan.
Shadow. That's a good
Oh
movie.
yeah, that's a good movie.
That's a good movie. Yeah.
So, but at the same time, it was also really, when you grow up in an environment that I grew up in, you also see the need to be strong, like have the means to fight and defend yourself and things like that. So, because even with the martial art groups there at that time, as I mentioned, I was with the Tang Soo Do, but this was the old school Tang Soo Do, the hard style, right? There was still this rivalry between groups, and there was this paranoia where your training mindset was, hey, I'm training so that if I have to face a Shotokan guy, or if I have to face a judo, I'm not going to dishonor my group or my club or my system. So there was that thing. As a matter of fact, our master before, he would say, if somebody challenged you, you just beat the crap out of him if he comes from another group. He would give you licenses, for example. And when Taekwondo started coming in, then the focus was on Taekwondo, and the atmosphere was like you're looking for an opportunity or an excuse to try it out against the other guy.
So did you try it against the other guy? So go over stories about that.
Well, I have. I did, but it wasn't me who did it, who started it. Because when I was in high school, we were training for, in high school, we have the Citizen Army training, which is actually preparatory for college ROTC, right?
Right.
So this is 1 year on your fourth year. And then we had our tactical team. Our tactical teams were typically ROTC guys, the college guys. So there was this one Shotokan guy who was an ROTC officer in college, so was several years ahead of us. And you know, in high school, in CAT, you have a lot of girls in your officer training as well. It's a mix. So he was probably wanting to impress the girls. So one time at lunch, he went into the lecture hall, and then he asked, "Oh, who does martial arts here?" And I was known to do martial arts because in Tang Soo Do tournaments, I'd be competing in the forms, competitions, and during demos, they would ask me to demonstrate because I could kick, man. I could kick when I was a kid. I
So
could.
you have a pretty strong upchugging.
Yeah, my kicks were really sharp. Yeah, they were just snappy. Unfortunately, that's all gone now. So he asked us who did martial arts, and then he said, "Oh, Del Rosario, I know you do martial arts. Come here." So he comes over and he tells us to spar, right? And I'm like, "There's no way you're gonna impress the girls at my expense." So that was basically, but that kind of mindset, I actually I brought it with me when I went to college, because when we got to Kalayaan, the first thing I did was actually identify the martial artists there, and then what I did was organize a one night in the week where we would all spar each other. So you'd have guys from Taekwondo with a Taekwondo background, karate background, some Tang Soo Do guys, you know, and it wasn't that hard because we didn't have safety equipment. But at that time, when you say study spar, you actually had contact. It just wasn't with the intent to, you know what I mean? It just wasn't with the intent
It's not the light touch point sparring. It's not the light touch point sparring.
It's not the point. It's not the touch spar. You know, when you hit, it goes. That's the hit. That's the hit. You know, that's how we would do study spar before. So that's how that's a kind of mindset that I brought with me when I went to college. And I think that's really the mindset that most martial artists, at least in the 80s, in Mindanao had. It's like it's a paranoid mindset where you're always preparing for a challenge. And I think it has to do with the general atmosphere, general, the state of things, the environment that we had there in Mindanao at that time.
So tell me about your first FMA experience, because I do notice this about a certain generation of FMAers, particularly ones that kind of grew up during that time of like the maybe late 60s up to about like the late 80s. It's like, we have martial arts. Tell me about your first experience, and tell me if during one of your training you got lit up by one of them old manos. So go ahead.
Excuse me, I didn't quite understand the question.
I said I do notice this about a particular generation of Filipinos that like they don't know that, oh, we have martial arts, you know. So like typically kids that grew up like early 70s to about like the late 80s. And then, so tell me about your particular experience, like when you did find out, and if you got lit up by one of the manos. You know what I mean? Go ahead.
Well, my I did have I was aware of Arnis at that time, but for one thing, I didn't know that it was a Filipino martial art. Right, that's first thing. But second, I also had this misconception of Arnis because for the most part, what I saw growing up as a kid was what was taught in the PE classes in high schools and things like that, which was very it was very basic. It wasn't impressive at all. So and then you see Master Elmer. I mean, I don't know if for those who've seen Master Elmer, man, that guy, his strikes would, it would send shivers. Just thinking about getting hit by those strikes would send shivers up your spine. Just thinking about what's the effect's gonna have on you, because that guy can strike, man. He can strike. So that's the thing. I realized, and then I asked. Actually, here's one piece of trivia. I I never I didn't look at martial arts. I didn't get into martial arts for the sports aspect. So I got into taekwondo for a short time, but I didn't like it because it was too sport for me. I felt that I would form habits that I couldn't use in the streets, right?
Right.
So uh, one of the major guys who actually influenced me to get into Filipino martial arts is Baste, Carlos, because we were friends in college and we were talking about martial arts, right? And I was telling him, I'm looking for something that I can really focus on, but I'm looking for something that's street worthy, something that you can really use in the streets, not sport. And he says, why don't you get into Filipino martial arts, Arnis? So first thing I asked him was, what are you gonna do? You gonna carry a stick with you all the time? And then he goes on to explain, no. You can use the same principles of the stick without a stick, right? And then he goes on to show it to me. So initially, he was inviting me to join him on Sundays in the Luneta with the KI group, right?
Wow.
Wow. But Luneta was too far from Quezon City, so I was like, oh my God, I have to be there this early, and I have to travel all the way to Quezon City. That's several hours. I mean, just the travel time alone is going to take longer than my actual practice session there. So he said, well, there's a group here, right? Yeah. Some of my fraternity brothers are practicing it. That was a newly established group by Master Elmer. He said, oh, that's Mang Ben. That's also a great style. Why don't you get into that?
I have to rewind. Your first style is KI?
No. Talking to Baste, initially he was inviting me to KI.
Oh.
Because it was too far, I said, I don't think I can take the travel time going all the way to Luneta every Sunday for the training. And then he said, well, there's another group here, right? He said, yeah, Lescas, Master Elmer's group. He said, why don't you join that? Because that's also a really good style or good system, FMA system. And that's how I started. But prior to that, my fraternity brothers, some of my friends were already into it. And they were already recruiting me, but I just wasn't convinced then at that time. Until Bastet showed me how you could actually use it without a weapon. So and then so I had my first session with Master Elmer, and after I saw him execute his strikes, man, I was hooked.
Yeah, because that's like someone kicking you in the face, but with like a solid object. That's like getting hit by a sledgehammer.
Yeah, that guy can hit. He can. I mean, so amazing how he generates power.
With this thing, I have to ask: does Mang Ben and the LSI methodology back then, the Les Cats methodology, do you guys practice any kind of internal arts for upkeep? Like just to. No, it's just a hard style. You know what I mean? Okay,
it's cool. Just hard style. It's just it's really just physical conditioning and developing the power through in Master Elmer's case through proper body mechanics, which he saw in Mang Ben.
How about basically. You? Do you do any kind of yoga now or?
Well, I do yoga to stay limber, but not in the internal sense where that because I'm a I'm a non-theist, right? So I lean more towards the science rather than the esoteric stuff usually as associated with martial arts.
Yeah, so I mean that's good. You come from a really a sports science type of background. So let's go over
Yeah,
that, shall we? Um,
yeah, yeah.
your particular branch of Mumbin's lineage, Lescas, is very known even throughout its contemporaries in the Filipino martial arts community as someone that us as a group that studies biomechanics and kinetics. So can you go over that with us? Basically trying to reach the target as quickly as possible, efficient use of the body so you don't get tired, that kind of thing, generating as much
Yeah.
peak force as a human being is capable of. So go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is a big influence of that is comes from the late Master Elmer Ibanez because he was studying human kinetics when he was teaching in the University of the Philippines. And basically the Lescas methodology is him putting what he learned in human kinetics and retention into creating a program so that you would have specific qualities and attributes that would be developed. Uh, so that's the major influence. I shared before, one of our favorite sayings, at least in my group, is "Let science the crap out of this." Right. So and Nathan, the rest of the guys in Lescas, particularly Nathan, yeah, Nathan actually got into studying human kinetics as well, and took that even further. See? So a lot of the things that we did was from a science background. So you know how the other systems would say, "Oh, this is the engaño, the feint, right?
Right.
So you do this, that." Master Elmer um, taught this in terms of refractory response.
So explain
I
that.
don't know if
Explain
you're
that to them. Explain that to them.
refractory response.
I know what that is, but explain that to
You
them.
know what that is, right?
Yeah.
That's that short period of time where your muscles from the peak they kind of relax before they can go out again and do something, do a certain movement. And so that's the time where you exploit when you do a feint, you exploit that particular gap in between the muscle movement to redirect so that he's not able to react. And that's the refractory response. So things like that. And then he would also talk about mirroring, things like mirroring. So when you say you're mirroring, basically it's when you imitate what your opponent's doing, so that psychologically you kind of get attached, so that by the time you create that link, he starts doing what you're doing. I don't know if you tried that before, and I'm gonna diss Professor Hokano right now, so I'm not sure if he's watching.
No,
No,
I
not exactly this, but this is what
he was watching, so I don't know if he's still here. He was watching.
yeah, he was watching. So we would try to apply this in sparring before, because Master Elmer was also heavily into sparring. So there's one time we were sparring, right? So I thought of, okay, let's try mirroring. So Bob Hokano, he had his stick like this. He moves it to the other side. I mirror him and move my stick to the other side. He moves it back. I move it back. Moves it up. I move it up. So that when I would do the move, he would mirror me. And then one time I did this, with this. I did this with my weapon so that it was horizontal. He mirrored me. As soon as he did that, I did an upward strike. Right? So his stick goes like this. And then it goes straight down to his head. And after that, I was wondering what that strike was for because it didn't reach my face. And then he says he stick open, and then he said, "Oh, so that's why." And it goes back down straight into his crown. So those were the things that we did. So that was how it was taught. And then Master Elmer was so much into kinetic linking.
Chain
He also started
kinetic linking. Yeah, chain kinetic linking.
He was also into boxing.
Yeah.
So he knew how that you're supposed to generate the power from the ground up. It's like a wave, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was into that, and using your body and the torque and the what's this? The tensing of the core of your core muscles. So even for Mang Ben, the core muscles were important. They would tell you he would tell you to develop your core because that's where the power of your strikes come from.
Yeah.
Basically, the muscles that come from here, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
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 yeah,
just a little bit of context, because in a wild card boxing methodology,
yeah,
that's really the secret to Pacquiao's power. First off, he has a really big delivery system. Two fingers of mine is like one of his. So
yeah.
he has a bone structure of maybe a 200-pound person for a small guy. He has big calves, so he's able to generate that kind of essentially that kinetic link from the ground. And
From the ground. Yeah,
you see his ab muscles. He tries to do like, oh, his warm up is like 2,000 sit ups or core exercise. That's his warm up. That's not
yeah.
his main core workout. So yes, sir. So please work out your tummy, even if it's filled with fat, even if it's Fedor Emelianenko. He has a strong core. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So one of the things that we did before to develop that feel of how to transfer the energy from the ground up was to strike the tire until muscle failure. Because the idea being, because if your muscles are fresh, right? So you strike the tire, at the first part, you'll still be relying on your muscle strength to generate the force. But as your muscles tire out, you start looking for other ways and means to generate the force without having to rely on your muscle strength. See, so then you start pushing from your hand. You start creating that kinetic chain from the ground going up, so that you can generate that additional force, and that's where you learn to use it. Basically, that's why I think these arts that practice whip, that's really very good because it gives you the idea of a wave coming from the ground up through the weapon and then having it travel through the whip all the way to the end.
yeah, because you feel it travel from your foot down to your lower lumbar, and then
Yes,
your
yes,
latissimus area, your core latissimus area, and then all the way through your hand.
all the
Yeah,
way to your shoulders, all the way until even down to your grip, where
yeah,
it adds just that little bit
that motion.
of power. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that
you know,
that that that
you
last
have to
flick.
change it. Yeah, that
Yeah,
last click, and you have to change it so that it's uninterrupted all the way from down up, and
yeah.
that's always,
I always tell people if they really want to build punching power, like besides chopping wood and using a medicine ball, what they really need to do is throw a baseball. I mean
yeah,
that's a secret, because
yeah.
like you see Pacquiao, particularly in his prime days, he like even that's the why he got knocked out by Marquez. He puts his whole
Mm,
body and soul into a shot. Like
yeah.
he does a ki in the end, and I always tell people like the reason why people breathe out when they punch. Some boxers do ki. The reason why they do that is because it tenses the core muscle
It
of the
tenses
left.
the abdomen,
Right.
the muscles. Yeah, you go, you know,
Yeah.
it
So that's
tenses
cool.
the core.
So that's cool. You guys had that same methodology. That's awesome.
Yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
if you look at a lot of Nathan's videos lately, he's been focusing on that, on other training methodologies that develop the same muscle movement, just so that you get the idea of creating that wave from the ground up and focusing all of that power towards the very tip of your weapon. So a lot of guys think that it's muscle power. It's not. As a matter of fact, you have to be relaxed if you want to deliver a really powerful shot. You
What
can't be all tense.
the one thing I say about it is you have to think about it in a systema type of methodology, and walang kalutay-lutay hand. They're like this, like they have
Yeah.
your hand fall to your waist. You feel like it's a rock
Mm.
and it falls to your waist, because some people like you notice that when they punch they tense up. what ends up happening is you keep that kinetic energy inside of you instead of
Yes.
having it
Instead of
travel.
having it flow. Instead of
Yeah.
having it flow.
Yeah. So
So when you talk about that, like coming from a science background, when you talk about chi, I would say that's chi. It's not some kind of force or energy. It's really just the ability to let things flow kinetically. So coming from a coming from a non-theist, purely skeptical background, that's what I'd say.
that's good.
Yeah.
That's good. I like this. So continue with your training with Guru Elmer and that science methodology and what you're doing now, trying to have a synthesis of KI and less gas in Mandirigma Kaliradman.
Okay. Well, I think first and foremost, I'd like to explain my views on what the essence of Filipino martial arts actually is. You see, when you talk about Filipino martial, before we had these different systems that came out, before we had actual schools, I believe, or I would think, my theory is that the Filipino martial arts was something very personal. I mean, if you look at, like, let's say you look at the Wikipedia page of the different Kenjutsu arts, you'd see quote unquote styles there, and then you notice that there are certain styles where it only had one practitioner, and the style died with him. Sorry, um, and that you see that the style or the system is very personal. It's basically, it's not a school, it's not something codified. So before the advent of FMA schools, I think that's really the essence of FMA. You know, when people say, "Oh, this is the original art. This is how it's supposed to be. This is the original system." There was no original system, because when your focus is not on preservation of the art, your focus is on fighting, which was the focus of our forefathers, of the old guys before. You would tend to adapt anything that you see that could make you a better fighter,
Yeah, because
regardless whether or not it was originally part of your system. That
yeah,
was that was your mindset,
and the reason
right?
why a true warring art is like that is because they still go to war.
Yes,
So the thing
yes,
is, like, you have to incorporate what you see in the battlefield works. You can't be like, this is holy writ. I got this from my great 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 grandfather. I'm
yes,
not
yes,
changing it.
yes.
A true hallmark of a warring art is it really evolves. Not even every
It
year,
evolves.
but
It adapts.
every engagement it evolves. Because you're like,
Every engagement it
it's
evolves.
like
Exactly.
was like, wow, like that particular angle didn't work so well when I was fighting in like this really wet ground that I can't use that anymore. I'll use this instead. And so
Yeah,
that's how you know. That's how you know it's a warring art is if it constantly evolves for sure.
yeah, yeah. So that's a mind. So if we talk about the essence of FMA, the essence of FMA is evolution. I think uh, it's really being open, being eclectic, and adapting what works for you, right? So, and that kind of mindset, actually, I got that basically from Master Elmer, because Master Elmer was open. Although his core art was lightning, he wasn't close to other arts as well. As a matter of fact, the reason why I studied Balintawak when I had the opportunity with this master in Cagayan de Oro, his name is Master Rico Carino, was because Master Elmer saw this tape. He had a tape of Grandmaster Bobby, and he was very impressed. And he said, this is a good art. If you get the opportunity, you study it as well. But there's a caveat there, right? You only take what you can synthesize into your own movement. What fits well into your movement. You don't take it hook, line, and sinker. You take what doesn't conflict with your natural tendencies, given the fact that you have a base art. So you'd be picky with the arts or with the different influences that you see, and incorporating it. You have to take note that it doesn't conflict with your natural movement. So if you look at the way I teach now with Mandirigma Kali, it actually has influences of Balintawak as well, but it's tweaked so that it incorporates or it doesn't clash with the general principles and movement of Lescas. So that was my major influence. That's why I've never been close to the idea of looking at others and looking at, okay, this is good, this is effective. If I can study this, if I had the opportunity, I would go and study this because I think this is something I can incorporate and make me better. And this is also something that I encourage my students to do because if you notice, Mandirigmang Kaliradman, I don't have my name on it because it's not my style. You know, once I go, then my style goes with me, right? Or my system goes with me. But because my students have to develop their own styles, the styles that suit them, right? So I don't, I actually encourage them to experience other styles or other systems and see what they can pick out of that can make them better.